And I'm joined by Gordon Brown and by Michael Levac. But what I'd like to do, because I always like to do this at the festivals I organise, is to involve you, to involve the audience. You all have opinions, you all have ideas. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. And if you would like to ask Gordon a question, please stick your hand up and we will get a roving mic to you. Now, have we got any roving mics? Yep, great. Okay, any questions for Gordon? The lady at the front here. And then gentleman at the back.
Hi, I was delighted to hear of Gordon's intervention on the radio this morning. It really is just what is needed. However, the second item that I heard was the title of a book by P.J. O'Rourke applying to the American election, and it was called How the Hell Did This Happen? And I think it is a question that is relevant here too, because we do have an administration that has been unhindered, and I think a lot of your great ideas will depend on an effective opposition. We have an administration who has been allowed, who's been permitted to act like a wrecking ball on education, on health, social justice.
Which administration do you mean?
I mean the administration in the Scottish Government, led by the SNP, obviously. You know, they've been allowed, the SNP have been allowed to get away with this. Child poverty, of course, as Gordon mentioned, high up the agenda. So we really need, Adam Smith himself said that how can a society flourish and be happy when so many of the citizens are poor and miserable? And that still is the case for these children in poverty. So we really need that effective opposition to put ideas like Gordon's into practice and to come forward, not just with what we don't like, but with what we do like.
Do you have a question?
Sorry, the question is how are we going to do it? I see, I'm Patricia Cleghorn of a company called Orchid. Our byline is to help you flourish. And I see throughout the UK, businesses, people in education, from universities to Polmont, some people in the creative industries, various things where I see that people are needing this help that on Gordon's plan we can have. But we do need the effective opposition in Scotland to have them come to. So Gordon, any thoughts on that, what I'm saying?
Well, thanks for your question, Patricia, and thanks. I should say thanks for all of you, because it's a long morning. I started speaking at 10 and you're still here, so thank you very much for staying.
Miracle.
I don't know if you know the story of the Chinese finance minister who was addressing a big conference, and it started at 10 o'clock, and he'd spoken for an hour, and by that time, a third of the audience had gone. Then he'd spoken for an hour and a half, and by that time, 3/4 of the audience had gone. Then he got to 2 hours, and there was only one person left. And he was rather inquisitive as to why that one person had stayed and everybody else had gone. And he said, "Excuse me, but why have you stayed?" And the person said, "I'm the next speaker." So maybe we've got the next speaker still here. That's a really interesting question, because I mean, this is a festival of ideas, and it's not sort of party political or partisan, and therefore I think what Scotland needs is a more vigorous debate, and I think events like this make us think hard about what kind of society we're creating. So, you know, I raised poverty this morning because I was genuinely shocked to see these figures and to see how little coverage they got. But it really is a question as to why we haven't done more when we've got the powers to do so. But then when you look at the education, I mean, my children are 13 and 10, and they're at school, and you think, why are not enough resources going into education? And why are our schools not doing as well as they should? And then, of course, you have to deal with the health service, and you say, well, you know, there was a lot of money went into the health service to try and make it better, but there are real problems. Certainly, I see problems in Fife about meeting the needs that people have. And clearly, we've got this issue about elderly care that's not being properly addressed, and people are in hospital when they should be in the community. There's this huge issue that the cottage I was at yesterday has raised with me about mental illness amongst mothers, but also amongst teenagers. And there's 9 months, 18 months waiting lists. It's outrageous. So we need to have a debate about these questions, and I think a forum like this allows us to say, well, look, what kind of society? That's why Scotland 2025 is quite a useful title. What kind of society are we going to be creating in these next few years? And how can we improve our education system? The funny thing about education, it seems to me, is that the SNP government are failing because they've moved away from the Scottish traditions of education, not adopted them. And our tradition was for a broad-based education, teaching people about, Adam Smith would say about, what mattered, teaching people in a way that they could learn how to learn, to adapt to new skills. And I just wonder whether there may be a lot of teachers here who may think that I'm in disagreement, but how are we taking that forward for the modern world? Now, these are the sort of questions I think we should be discussing. And, if we had a session on education, I think it would be very productive. And maybe the next time there's a Festival of Ideas, there should be one on education, one on health, one on poverty, about how we can deal with these issues.
Noted. Thank you. Gentleman in the red jumper at the back. The gentleman there.
Thanks. David Ross, I'm Council Leader. I've got 4 points I'd like your thoughts on that I've gathered from all the speakers and from the event last night. And I'd just like to thank you for really organising and being developed in this, because I think there's a tremendous lot of ideas and issues being brought out today. First one was, I think today we've heard Jerry Grimshaw and we've heard yourself, Gordon, talking about the kind of facts about jobs and employment and trade. But the point Ed Bowles was making last night was, at this time, the debate isn't about fact, it's about feelings, and feelings about people not doing so well, feelings about immigration, those kind of things. Are we tackling that in the right way? The second point really was, I think one of the nationalist arguments for if Scotland was in the EU and the UK was out, lots of companies from America and the rest of the world would relocate to Scotland to get access to the European market. Is that realistic? The third point about devolution and federalism, I've always felt we can't just limit the argument to devolution for Scotland. We actually need to be looking at how does the UK work and how is it working for the English and the Welsh regions as well, and the Northern Powerhouse and things, and how do we engage better with them to do that. And the final point, just from a council point of view, I feel devolution isn't just about to the UK Parliament or the Scottish Parliament. It needs to go down much more to communities and local areas. And my fear is that what we're seeing at the moment, despite the rhetoric from the current government in Holyrood, is an over-centralisation of, we see that of they think they can determine how much schools get better than the local authority and local schools. They have decided we've had a 10-year freeze of the council tax rather than allowing it to local councils to make that decision on behalf of their electorates, and we've seen the centralisation of the police. And my worry is that we're seeing a replication of what Thatcher did in the 80s, of where there was opposition from things like the GLC and the metropolitan boroughs. She shut them down and abolished them, and that is a worry for me. Could you comment on, I know it's a lot of things, but maybe on some of the points?
Thank you.
Well, I just want to say, David, you've done a great job as council leader in promoting action against poverty. Fife is probably the only council I know that commissioned a major study on what was happening to poor children, what was happening to poor people in Fife. And you've got the Carnegie Trust, and I think Angus Hogg has been here this morning because they've been a supporter of this to support you in doing this major study. And you brought out facts about poverty in Fife that made me sit up and take notice, and other people. And then you're piloting a citizen's income, which would be a new way of trying to help people who are poor. That they have a guaranteed income, whether you're in work, a guaranteed income if you're in training, a guaranteed income if you're a carer. And there's a lot of work, I think, that would be very interesting on how we can devise a better system of getting and taking people out of poverty, because it is clear that because of the working arrangements now, the 0 hours, and it's clear because of the pressures on families with 2 or 3 children, that we are not taking people out of poverty, we're actually pushing people further into poverty. So the work that you've done in Fife, I think, is really, really important to that. And I do want to congratulate you personally on your leadership of that, because it has changed the way people think about poverty in Scotland as well as in Fife. And your questions actually relate to this in a way. First of all, on you're saying that it's emotion and not facts that are driving all these debates, and certainly that's the basis on which Donald Trump fought the election in America, that he could drive people's emotions by making them afraid or angry or resentful rather than facts. And you know, for most people, he seemed to be a stranger to the truth. In other words, he would just produce a fact that suited him, and even when it was denied, he would claim that it was still true. So there is no doubt that emotion drives. And of course, Adam Smith's philosophy was, and David Hume before him, was recognizing that what we feel and our emotions are crucially important in the decisions that we make, even when the facts may be against the position that we eventually take. But I think you've got to explain to people, as Ed Balls was saying last night, about what's happening with migration, what benefits we have, what losses may be incurred if we don't do certain things. I think a lot of people are concerned more about the rate of change than about change itself, and they might accept change if they thought it was going to be gradual. And I think, obviously, that some of the communities where the greatest resentment against immigration happens is where there's the least immigration at all. But, you know, I was encouraged. We have a number of Syrian families in Fife, and I think, David, you were important in bringing Syrian families and giving them the chance to settle in Fife. And I was encouraged when I met the Syrian families that you brought here, but also when I saw the stories about what was happening on the Isle of Arran, when Syrian families arrived in Arran, how they were welcomed, how they arranged, I think, for Christmas, a showing of It's a Wonderful Life, the film, to show people that, you know, people could get on and they could work together and everything else. And the church, I think, turned itself for Friday prayers into a mosque. So the Church of Scotland in Arran allowed the new community to use the same building as a mosque. So you can see that there's a lot of good things that we can talk about as well. So we can persuade people of the benefits of integrating with other communities. I don't think what is essentially Alex Salmond's argument about that if London leaves the European Union, then all the financial services from America would move from London to Edinburgh. I don't think that's going to happen, because we're not going to be part of the British single market. And these companies, as Jerry Grimstone said, they want stability. They want to know that the arrangements will last. I just don't think that's what's going to happen. I think from the regions in England, I think it's really important to recognise that things are changing there. I think in the northeast, in the northwest, in the Midlands, in Yorkshire and Humberside, there's a huge set of changes now in the attitudes people have. I mean, 10 years ago, I couldn't persuade them when I wanted to look at how they look at regional devolution. Now I think there's quite a big proposal, the Council of the North, and that would be a council that would bring together the North, the Northwest, the Northeast, and Yorkshire and Humberside, and they would form a Council of the North to represent the interests of the North. And I think that is the next stage of devolution in England now. So while Scotland has its parliament, Wales has its assembly, and Northern Ireland has its assembly, the North may have a council and the Midlands may have a council. And it could start as people who were local government elected councillors being on this indirectly elected body, therefore, and then it could expand. But I think the way forward for the north of England is now a bit clearer, and therefore I think what we're talking about, a federal relationship in the United Kingdom, becomes even more possible. And you're absolutely right. I was talking about this notion of popular sovereignty this morning, because I think a lot of people misunderstand. When they think of sovereignty, they think of the state, they think of national sovereignty, the government with all the power. In fact, traditionally and historically, Scottish people have always believed that power comes from the people. Power is derived from the people. It's not derived from the Queen, it's not derived from Parliament, it's not derived from the state, it's derived from the people. And of course, if power is derived from the people have the right to choose. And you can choose to put your powers into local government or into community councils, as well as into a Scottish Parliament, as well as having co-decision making in the UK. And therefore, I think if you start from this idea of popular sovereignty, it leads to more power coming to those areas at a local level where you can make decisions better and closer to the people. And I think you're right, there has been too much concentration on one tier of government and too little on how more power can rest with local people in local circumstances making their own decisions.
Thank you, Gordon. Any other questions? The gentleman at the front here with a body warmer on.
You made an attractive
Can you hold the mic
presentation
closer
in
to
terms of
yourself?
federal.
Hold the mic up.
You made an attractive presentation in respect of your federal proposals there. But unfortunately, when we look at it realistically, are we not just creating a bureaucratic mess by bringing all the powers back to a government which is perhaps could be quoted as being second-rate, and to a bureaucracy of civil servants who are not prepared and trained to take on such a role?
Thank you.
Well, I think that's an important point about, obviously, if the Scottish Parliament has a power, it should be in a position to use it properly. And again, just go back to the children's poverty, to have the power to top up child tax credits, to know you have 260,000 kids now in poverty, and not to do it is, in my view, a dereliction of duty. You need to train more people, obviously, but we can't allow powers to go from Brussels simply to Whitehall, and that would be a power grab on the part of the United Kingdom government. It would be a greater centralisation of power, and the very problem we're trying to solve, which is too much centralisation, would be exaggerated by all these powers going to Westminster. And that's why I was very surprised when Theresa May made that speech in Glasgow a few days ago and said, you know, we might even just think of taking more powers back from the Scottish Parliament to Westminster now. I think that was a terrible mistake, and it's a misunderstanding of the fact we're a multinational state in Britain. So, yes, if you've got powers, you should learn how to use them and to use them properly. And yes, we don't want big bureaucracies, but I don't think we should support leaving the European Union, which I never wanted to do. But if we're leaving the European Union, you can't just pass all these powers to Whitehall. And so they would then call agriculture, fisheries, regional policy, environmental policy, a $4 billion budget they would have. I think we've really got to make sure that the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh and other assemblies have some of these powers. So I can't agree with everything you say, but I do agree that it's important that those people who have power use it effectively and use it with expertise.
Thank you. The gentleman behind there.
In 2025, do you think our Scottish MPs will have enough to do at Westminster? I mean, after all, Mary Black's bored already.
Well, you know, there's only one thing to suggest to Mary Black if she's bored. I mean, you know, give the seat back to Douglas Alexander, who was a very good member of Parliament. I think yes. I mean, I think, look, if you take the United States of America, they've got a federal system. They've got elections for governors in the states. They've got elections for legislators in the states. Some places they've got upper houses and lower house in the states, but they've also got the Senate, and they've also got the House of Representatives, and they've got hundreds of members in the House of Representatives. And they're elected, I think, every 2 years. So, I mean, this is a sort of permanent electioneering. Every federal or every system where there is federal-style arrangements like Australia and Canada and Germany, obviously you have members elected to the local or the state legislatures and then to the national legislatures. And it does seem to work. So I don't see it as a problem. I mean, Westminster would still have responsibility for macroeconomic policy and the currency. They would still have responsibility for defence and foreign affairs. They would still have responsibility for pensions. I think, you know, the SNP never mention the word pensions when they talk about independence, because they know that people in Scotland realise there is a benefit to pooling and sharing the resources so that you get a better pension system from having 60 million people contributing to it instead of 5 million. And so there is a lot of work on pension, social security, and of course there are other areas where you've got to coordinate, or you, like the environment, where you can't do things unless there's some form of coordination. One of the sadnesses of the devolution settlement is a lot of it was supposed to be based on people cooperating between Scotland and London, and House of Commons and the Scottish Parliament to do things together, and that never really worked out because of the standoff between the two administrations. So, no, I think there is plenty to do, and those people who are bored with Westminster or say that they can't find anything to do there, I think that, they should feel perfectly free to leave.
The gentleman, well, I'd take somebody else who hasn't had a question. There's a lady next to the lady with the yellow jumper.
Evening. I was interested both in your ideas about federalism being a long-term liberal, something that chimes with me from many years ago, but I'm also interested in how what you said about the demographic of Scotland ageing and how that fits. Both the speakers at the previous forum emphasised their European scope to their business and to their university. And I'm wondering how the free movement of people fits into your idea of bringing back from Brussels the powers to Scotland. Would the free movement of people be one of those powers? If not, how does it fit in?
Yeah, I should have acknowledged that the Liberal Party from the 1880s onwards supported federal home rule for Scotland and Wales and England, of course, as well as for Ireland. And perhaps if they had been successful in getting that through with Gladstone's government more than 100 years ago, Ireland would still be in some way part of the United Kingdom and not totally separate. So the Liberal Party have got a very proud record in supporting federal home rule. The Labour Party, by the way, in 1918 stood on a manifesto for home rule as well. They had 3 separate Scottish items in the manifesto. Some people may have seen this in the history books. One was land nationalisation, which they supported. The second one was home rule for Scotland. And the third was prohibition of alcohol. And they never managed to get any of these through in the next 100 years.
Thank God.
To some people's relief. I know, I remember reading about when some of the early Labour politicians were explaining the manifestos to packed public meetings like Jimmy Maxton and all these people in Glasgow in the 1920s. And when suddenly they said that they supported prohibition, the gasp from the audience made it look as if they might lose their seats. You were asking about freedom of movement, and yes, you could argue that migration policy should be under the Scottish Parliament. There is, however, an issue that I think you've got to recognise, and that is, if Scotland has a different migration policy, immigration policy from that of England, then people would start to argue that there should have to be border controls. And that becomes an issue, because that is an issue between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland at the moment. Because the Republic of Ireland has free movement of people from the European Union into the Republic, but Northern Ireland, under the UK's arrangements, will not have free movement of people from Europe. So how do you stop people who are legally coming into the Republic of Ireland, then moving across the border, if it's open, into Northern Ireland and suddenly becoming an illegal immigrant, but nobody knows they're there? Now, the answer is apparently going to be that you have a work permit system, so you can't legally work in the United Kingdom unless you have a work permit if you're coming from abroad. But of course, that's also difficult to administer, because America has got that sort of arrangement where you should have a work permit, but there are 11 million illegal immigrants in the United States of America. So there are real difficulties with administering a system where you have one part of the United Kingdom with one policy for migration. So let's say we said any unskilled worker could come into Scotland, but England said only skilled workers could come in. So when an unskilled worker moves across the border from Scotland into England, you're then relying on an employer not only not to employ that person illegally, but to report that person for being illegally trying to obtain work in your country. And that's a huge burden on employers to administer a system that people thought, in some cases at least, should be administered by having border controls. So these are difficult issues that have got to be resolved.
Donald Trump will fix it. We've got time for only two more questions. Gentleman at the back and the lady in the grey top. So let's go to the gentleman at the back first in the blue jumper. And then the lady in the grey top.
Charles McLaughlin is my name. Mr. Brown and politicians like yourself who have retired, I think that's a fantastic loss to the community, and particularly United Kingdom community right across all the political parties. However, I don't really sense that what we have in the country is the coming together of all the retired brains and the benefits of, let's say, collaboration. As albeit with all the difficulties that you've explained today in terms of globalisation, which I can accept. I feel that if we had a better collaboration of all the brainpower that unfortunately has retired from either the Scottish Parliament or the UK Parliament, and recognise that the huge influence that's happening across Europe and United States is probably being greatly influenced by the media platform that exists. So what my question is how can we use the significant retired brains, if you like, that exist not only in our own country, but throughout Europe, to take a different view to try and compete with the media platform, which is probably the biggest influencing factor in swinging people away from the centre parties to what we have today. Thank you.
Well, I used to say to Ed Miliband when he was leader of the Labour Party, the best advice I could give him is not to listen to my advice. So, because, I mean, I didn't just retire. I mean, I lost the election in 2010 and I had to take responsibility for that. And I was sorry that that happened, but I had to accept that. I mean, I don't know whether I'm a retired politician or a recovering politician. I don't know. I always said I'm too young. Actually, I'm too old to be a comeback kid, so I'm not actually coming back. But I don't consider myself some sort of elder statesman. I feel that I'm here to help where I can and to play a part in where it's possible. The one thing that I would not be good at is your point of what's really necessary, and you're absolutely right. We need to be able to communicate through the social media, and you know, I don't really understand it in the way that others do. And I was talking to someone the other day, and I said, well, you know, how would Clement Attlee, the Labour Prime Minister in 1945, cope with Twitter or the social media? And then we came to, what would even Mrs. Thatcher have been able to do? And so the lady is not for tweeting. and so I think we need the young, the brains. I mean, my children at 13 and 10 are better at social media communication than I am. And Sarah certainly has 1 million people on her Twitter feed, but you know, we need people who can communicate through the social media. And Sarah does podcasts, which have become really interesting. I mean, lots of people are now listening to podcasts, and she's doing them on the Better Angels about how people can actually contribute to making a better community by their activity. And Ed Balls was on her, you know, and a lot of people have been, James Corden, you know, and all these people have been explaining how Bono, I think, how they want to make for a better community. So there are great sort of devices for getting through to people. Twitter, these broadcasts, these podcasts, and obviously other forms of social media. But I do see a huge amount of talent amongst young people to be able to do this. And I think the sadness is that lots of young people are turned away from what I would call more broadly public service. And you know, it's not just politics, but getting involved in community action and getting involved in debates like this and getting involved in Festival of Ideas. And we've got to find some way of encouraging young people to think that these issues are important and worth debating. So I'm probably not the person to reintroduce arguments through the social media. I just want to play my part in helping other people who have got a better chance of getting and communicating these messages across. And I think you know, today has actually proved that you know, last night there were, I think, nearly 400 people here to hear Ed Balls. I think at various points today there's been quite a lot of people here at this. I do make a plea, if you can, to come and hear Kirsty McNeil and Arabella Weir and others this afternoon, because they've got great messages. These are younger people who've got really big messages, and Kirsty is Deputy Director of Save the Children, and she's really a brilliant person. You've got Chris van der Kyle, who's an entrepreneur, who's got very big views about the future of Scotland. You've got this great geographer, Philip McCann, who's probably written the best book in the last year about how the inequalities in Britain have got to be addressed region by region, and he's a really brilliant man. And you've got Arabella, and then you've got Brendan Cox. So These are people far younger than me, and I reckon they are the voices of the future. So I know it's a long day, but I hope some of you will stay this afternoon and listen to what are great speakers after. Sally Magnuson obviously does a brilliant job on talking about charities, so I hope you will stay.
Last question, lady at the back. Thank you.
Thanks very much. My name's Mary McRae. I live in Dunfermline. I'm the constituency secretary there. Hello, Gordon. You are
Good
needed.
to see you.
Just as well, I'm also secretary for retired members for Unison for Scotland, and we say that retired members are needed, but we want to work with the young folk as well. But the question that I wanted to raise really follows on from the previous question, and it's about the right to remain. Now, interestingly enough, I got a letter just 2 days ago from a party member who is resigning from the party on the basis of his wife's right to remain or not, as the case may be. She has already applied and is filling in 85-page documents to try and seek to apply for the right to remain. I'm Irish. I carry an Irish passport. I might get chucked out. You know, my husband is Scottish. He might not get the right to come to Ireland with me if I'm sent back. We need to clarify that point, and I think the Labour Party needs to lead on that point. We need to make sure that people feel welcome. I'm seriously concerned about the amount of doctors who are saying, young doctors in particular, from overseas who are saying they need to go back. Where's the NHS going to be? That's a problem. We need to sort that, and we need to be clear. We need to be clear now before we lose all the best heads.
Thank you.
Well, I think there's something about Scotland that we should really feel proud about, and it's Scottish internationalism. And historically, we've always been an outward-looking people. Historically, we've always been welcoming to strangers. Historically, that when people are in difficulty, particularly people who are victims of wars or genocides or hunger and famine, we in Scotland have helped people. I think we should be very proud of that, because it's not nationalism, it's internationalism that we've shown in the past. And so I would gladly join a campaign to say that those people who are in this country should not be pushed out simply as a result of this vote that took place on the European referendum. And if there are individuals who need help and advice, I would gladly help if that was necessary to persuade the authorities that people should stay. But really, the government should now announce that they are clear that nobody's going to be thrown out as a result of the referendum result because they're a European citizen, and they're going to try and negotiate and use them as human fodder for a negotiation with the rest of Europe. I think you could easily get an agreement now that Europeans can stay in Britain, and British people who are in Europe should be able to stay in their respective countries. And I think it's long overdue. I mean, to have gone for a year with this hanging over people is just really unacceptable. I'm told that Angela Merkel was wanting to do a deal on this, but we didn't want to do it at that stage. But that may not be the right information. But you're absolutely right. We should never allow people who are particularly, of course, people who are serving the National Health Service in the way that they're doing, to feel that they are in any way threatened, having been welcomed into this country and being needed as part of our services. To have this hanging over them is simply unfair. So I hope we could all agree on that. And I think whatever party people are in, whatever faction people are in, I think we could all agree on that we owe a duty to people who have come to help us. And we certainly should not allow people to feel as insecure in this country as they may be in dictatorships or authoritarian countries where things are hanging over their head through no apparent reason. We've got to be there to help people in need.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Gordon Brown.
Thank you. William.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Levack, Chair of the Adam Smith Global Foundation. I know everybody's desperate to go and get a refreshment. You've had a very stimulating and eventful morning. Gordon's helped me by refreshing you and reminding you of the programme for the rest of the day. I'd also like to remind you that we have a food and drink fair just along at the college. I would like to thank Alistair Moffat for chairing this morning's session and his colleague Paula Ogilvie for all their support in helping to organise this first Festival Ideas. We'd like to thank Sir Jerry Grimstone, who's had to head off to get a flight. As you probably know, in his day job as chairman of Standard Life, he is extremely busy at the moment, and really appreciate his support, his contribution this morning, and indeed for coming along last night. I'd also like to thank Heather McGregor for her contribution, and finally remind you that we are welcoming and seeking donations, I always say, both in time and money. So if you want to volunteer, if this weekend has stimulated your thoughts and interest in Adam Smith and Adam Smith Global Foundation, please contact us and see how you can help. And once again, I thanked him last night. I'll thank Gordon again for his wonderful contribution, his willingness to give his time to us as a foundation, and the benefit we get from Gordon in drawing in all these speakers. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.